It was just past 7:20 p.m. when the emergency line rang at the Miami Springs Dispatch Center. The operator picked up, expecting another noise complaint or maybe a fender bender on the highway. Instead, a trembling voice whispered through the receiver, "There's blood everywhere. I think she's dead." The woman on the line was Evelyn Morales, a retired school teacher who had lived next door to the Morgans for nearly 10 years. She spoke in short, panicked breaths, words breaking between sobs. "Please, just send someone, now." Within 6 minutes, 2 patrol units pulled onto Palm Vista Drive, a palm-lined street that looked like something from a real estate brochure. Pastel homes, trimmed lawns, quiet perfection. Crime didn't happen here. Not this kind of crime. As red and blue lights reflected off stucco walls and polished SUVs, neighbors peeked through curtains, their faces pale in the glow. The home at 231 Palm Vista looked serene from the outside, lights glowing warmly behind frosted windows. But inside, something had gone horribly wrong. When Detective Marcus Hale arrived, he was already pulling on gloves before stepping past the yellow tape. He'd been called in from home, still in a gray t-shirt under his blazer, coffee breath lingering from a half-finished cup. He'd seen death before, plenty of it. But this one felt different the moment he stepped inside. The air was cool from the central AC, yet heavy, like the stillness after a storm. There was the faint citrus scent of lemon cleaner and underneath it, the unmistakable metallic tang of blood. Dr. Rebecca Morgan, 42, lay on the marble-tiled kitchen floor. A single gunshot wound to the temple. 1 bullet, no struggle, no overturned chairs. Her right hand rested near the counter, fingertips brushing the stem of a wine glass that had somehow not fallen. A salad sat unfinished beside her open laptop, the screen still lit with patient notes from her pediatric practice. Everything about the scene spoke of normalcy, of routine, of life in motion, until you noticed the pool of blood widening beneath her head. Next to her lay a smartphone, its cracked screen flickering faintly. On it, a thread of messages glowed between mother and daughter. The last one, from Lily, read simply, "You'll regret taking my phone away." Hale stared at the words for a long moment. He'd learned not to read too deeply into text messages. Anger typed into screens often meant less than it sounded. But something about the timing chilled him. He began his slow, methodical sweep of the room. Drawers yanked open, a lamp knocked over, jewelry scattered on the hallway dresser. At first glance, it screamed burglary, yet the pattern didn't fit. Nothing valuable was missing. No cash drawer emptied, no electronics gone. And then there was the back door, a shattered window, jagged glass glinting under the kitchen light. But the shards, they were on the outside of the house, not inside. Whoever broke it had done so from within. "This isn't a robbery," Hale muttered to the young forensics tech crouched nearby. "This is theater." The technician, Javier Ruiz, looked up and nodded grimly. "Yeah, whoever did this wanted it to look messy, but not too messy." Outside, the flashing lights washed across Evelyn Morales' trembling hands as she held a blanket around her shoulders. Her voice quivered as she described what she'd heard. "A loud pop, like fireworks," she said. "Then I saw Lily. She was walking away down the street. Backpack on, hair in a ponytail. I thought she was going to a friend's house." Evelyn paused, swallowing hard. "She didn't look scared, Detective. She looked calm. That's what scares me most." Calm. The word stuck with Hale. Teenagers don't walk away from gunshots calm, unless they already knew what had happened, unless they caused it. At that moment, the scene in Hale's mind began to reassemble like pieces of a puzzle clicking into place. A locked door, a staged break-in, a single gunshot, a missing daughter. It wasn't proof, not yet, but his instincts were rarely wrong. This wasn't random. This wasn't an intruder. It was personal. By 8:15, the coroner had arrived. Dr. Amelia Wong, clinical and detached, a woman who'd seen more death than most morticians. After a quick examination, she confirmed what Hale already suspected. Single bullet wound, close range, execution style. She never saw it coming. Those words hit harder than he expected, because in that instant, Hale knew what that implied. The shooter was someone Rebecca trusted, someone she didn't see as a threat until it was far too late. The investigation kicked into high gear. Every room of the Morgan home was photographed, cataloged, analyzed. The walls of Rebecca's office were lined with degrees. Johns Hopkins, University of Miami, framed testaments to a life of purpose. But on her desk lay something far more telling, a small leather-bound journal. Inside, Rebecca had written entries that read less like a doctor's diary and more like a mother's quiet plea for help. Lily's been so angry lately, she barely talks to me. I found her awake at 2 a.m. again, on that phone. I don't know what she's doing online, but it scares me. I'm trying so hard, but it feels like I'm losing her. The last entry, dated 2 weeks before her death, ended with a single sentence underlined twice. I don't know how to reach her anymore. Those words echoed in Hale's head as he closed the journal. He didn't need a psychologist to tell him what that meant. A house full of unspoken tension, a parent trying to maintain control, a teenager rebelling against it. Meanwhile, officers fanned out across the neighborhood. Lily's best friend, Amber Collins, claimed she'd been with her since after school, doing homework. But the story cracked fast. The city bus driver from Route 42 distinctly remembered Lily boarding his bus around 7:20, after her mother's estimated time of death. And the Morgan's home security system data revealed something even stranger. The alarm had remained armed until the police arrived. Nobody had turned it off, which meant whoever was inside didn't need to. Hale leaned against the counter, rubbing a hand across his jaw as the puzzle grew darker. The lack of chaos, the single bullet, the calculated staging. It didn't look like a child's panic. It looked like a plan. And that was the part he couldn't shake. When he finally stepped outside, the Miami air felt heavy, humid, almost suffocating. Reporters were already assembling beyond the barricades, microphones poised like vultures. He ignored them and lit a cigarette, his first in months. The smoke curled upward into the warm night as he stared at the glowing windows of the Morgan house. Behind those walls, a mother had died quietly, neatly, at the hands of someone she'd loved. He'd worked plenty of cases where rage was the motive, jealousy, betrayal, desperation. But control? That was something else. It was colder, smarter, more dangerous. Ruiz called him back inside moments later, holding up an evidence bag. Inside was a smartphone, cracked, blood-specked, but still powered on. Found this next to the body, Ruiz said. Belongs to Lily. Hale frowned. Her phone? Not her mother's? Ruiz nodded. Already confirmed. It's Lily's. But here's what's weird. The GPS tracker says it's at a completely different address. Hale blinked. You mean, it's showing as somewhere else right now? Yeah, Ruiz replied. Like, miles away. The detective stared at the device through the plastic. A phone that says it's across town, while lying on a blood-stained floor. It made no sense. Not yet. But he knew enough to trust when something didn't add up. He pocketed the bag and looked once more at the lifeless scene. The glass of wine, the open laptop, the blood that had stopped spreading. And then his eyes landed on a faint smudge near the refrigerator. A single, partial footprint. Too small to be an adult's. He didn't say anything, but he felt it deep in his gut, that same instinct every good detective learns to respect. This wasn't over. The next morning, Miami woke to the headlines. Beloved pediatrician found murdered in Coral Springs home. Police searching for missing 14-year-old daughter. To the city, it was a tragedy wrapped in mystery. To Detective Marcus Hale, it was something worse. A case that was about to redefine the meaning of premeditation. Somewhere out there, a 14-year-old girl was either a victim running from something unspeakable or the architect of it. And as the morning sun rose over Palm Vista Drive, Hale made himself a quiet promise. He would find her, and he would find out which. By sunrise, the Morgan house no longer looked like a family home. It had transformed into a crime scene, a sterile zone of numbered markers, camera flashes, and quiet murmurs. The yellow tape fluttered in the early morning breeze, while the scent of damp earth mixed with cleaning solvent lingered in the air. Detectives came and went, stepping carefully over the tiled floors that had, just 12 hours ago, echoed with the normal sounds of a family evening. Detective Marcus Hale stood near the kitchen counter, his hands buried deep in his coat pockets, eyes fixed on the cold emptiness where life had once moved so effortlessly. The details replayed in his mind: the single bullet, the staged break-in, the missing daughter. But what haunted him most were the words of the neighbor. She didn't look scared. She looked calm. That calmness was unnatural. It didn't belong in the aftermath of a murder. It belonged to someone who already knew what had happened. At the precinct, Hale's small task force gathered in the conference room, the smell of burnt coffee filling the air. The evidence board was already taking shape. Photos, handwritten notes, strings connecting questions that had no answers yet. Rebecca Morgan's smiling face stared out from the center of it all, surrounded by facts that painted a chilling contrast. Hale pointed to the photo of the shattered window. "Glass fell outward," he said flatly. "That means whoever broke it was inside." Sergeant Diane Lopez frowned, her pen tapping against her notebook. "Marcus, she's 14. You really think she could have planned all this?" Hale didn't answer immediately. He looked back at the photo, the faint reflection of the glass shards catching the light. "Maybe not alone," he said finally. "But nothing about this feels impulsive." The room fell silent, the hum of the overhead lights filling the space where disbelief lingered. A few hours later, Hale was standing outside a modest, single-story house on Oakmont Street, the home of Amber Collins, Lily's best friend. Amber's mother answered the door, exhaustion etched across her face. "She stayed here last night," she said before he even asked. "The girls said they were studying. I didn't know anything was wrong until I saw the news this morning." When Amber appeared, her eyes were swollen from crying, her voice trembling. Hale spoke softly, guiding her to the couch. "Tell me about last night, Amber. Start from after school." She hesitated, glancing nervously at her mother. "Lily told me to say she came here right after class, but she didn't." Hale leaned forward. "What time did she really arrive?" Amber swallowed hard. "Around 7:30, maybe later. She went straight to the bathroom to shower. She looked different, calm, quiet." When he asked if Lily had anything with her, Amber's voice cracked. "A backpack. She told me not to open it." That backpack, Hale would soon learn, held the murder weapon, the same handgun that had once been locked away in Rebecca's bedroom safe. Back at headquarters, evidence began aligning with disturbing precision. The bullet retrieved from Rebecca's body matched the 9mm pistol found in Lily's bag. The gun had been registered to Daniel Morgan, Lily's father, a man now living in Seattle, estranged from his daughter but still financially supporting her. The safe where Rebecca kept it showed no signs of forced entry. Only two people knew the combination: Rebecca herself and Lily, whose birthday numbers formed the code. Hale studied the report in silence. It wasn't just access. It was intention. Choosing a weapon, staging a break-in, wiping prints. Those weren't the panicked acts of a child. They were deliberate steps in a plan carefully thought out. Detective Lopez entered the room, dropping a folder on the table. "No forced entry anywhere. Alarm system was still armed when officers arrived. Whoever did this never left through the front door." Hale nodded, his jaw tightening. Because they had no reason to. They lived there. She flipped open another file. There's more. Wi-Fi logs show Lily's laptop was active at 7:12 p.m. That's just minutes before the estimated time of death. Hale exhaled slowly. She was home when it happened. It was no longer theory. It was data. Time-stamped, verifiable, impossible to ignore. Around the table, the detectives exchanged uneasy looks. The idea of a child orchestrating such precision was almost too much to process. But the most unnerving discovery didn't come from fingerprints or ballistics. It came from the digital forensics lab. Ruiz, the tech who had examined Lily's cracked phone, walked in with a puzzled look. "Sir, her phone's GPS shows she was at Amber's house during the time of the murder," he said. "But Wi-Fi logs and tower data placed the device right inside the Morgan home." Hale frowned. "So, what are we saying? The phone lied?" Ruiz nodded. "In a way, it's running a location spoofing app, fakes your GPS coordinates. It's how kids trick parents into thinking they're somewhere else." Hale stared at the evidence bag containing the phone. "When was the app installed?" 3 weeks ago, Ruiz replied. That detail stopped him cold. 3 weeks, the same week Rebecca's diary mentioned catching Lily doing something online that terrified her. The motive wasn't clear yet, but the timeline was. By afternoon, the story had broken on every news channel in Florida. Satellite trucks lined the street outside the precinct. "Dr. Slane in Miami home. Teen daughter missing," the anchors repeated, their voices heavy with speculation. Talk shows dissected the case. Experts debated psychology, and social media buzzed with theories ranging from abduction to revenge. But inside Hale's office, away from the noise, the detective sat staring at the whiteboard. 2 faces, mother and daughter, side by side. "We're missing the why," he murmured. Lopez, standing beside him, folded her arms. "Maybe it's as simple as the text said. Her mom took her phone." Hale gave a weary half-smile. "It's never just about the phone." He was right. What had started as a fight over control, over technology, over freedom, had spiraled into something unthinkable. That evening, just before sunset, police found Lily at a downtown bus terminal. She sat on a bench, hood pulled low, earbuds in, scrolling through another phone, a different one. When officers approached, she didn't run. "Lily Morgan?" one asked. She nodded. "You're here about my mom," she said quietly. When told she was being taken to the station, she didn't resist. No tears, no confusion, just silence. Hale watched through the interrogation room window later that night. She sat small and composed in the metal chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The room's harsh fluorescent lights reflected faintly in her dark eyes. He'd seen cold killers before, but never in the body of a 14-year-old girl. He entered slowly, taking the chair across from her. "Lily," he said gently, "I'm Detective Hale. I know this is hard, but I need to ask you a few questions." She nodded without looking up. "Where were you last night?" "At Amber's," she replied instantly. "Since after school." The smoothness of her tone caught him. It was practiced. "Were you at home at any point?" he asked. "No," she said, shaking her head. "I left right after class." Hale placed a photo on the table, her cracked phone, time-stamped from the scene. "This was found next to your mother. Can you explain that?" Her eyes flicked up only for a second. "She must have taken it from me. We fought about it earlier." "You didn't go back home?" he pressed. "No." He leaned forward slightly. "You know your phone was still sending location data from your house all night?" She blinked once. "I don't know what that means." "It means it didn't move," he said softly. "It stayed right there next to your mother." Lily's hands clenched together under the table. "Then I guess she kept it." The words came out too calm, too rehearsed. When the interview ended, she stood slowly, eyes still dry. Just before the door opened, she looked back at him. "Can I have my phone now?" she asked. For a moment, Hale couldn't speak. Of all the questions she could have asked, "Can I go home? Is my mom okay? What happens now?" She asked for the very thing that started it all. He realized then this wasn't a child in shock. This was a child in control. Hours later, with the building nearly empty and rain beginning to fall outside, Hale stood alone in the observation room. Through the glass, he could see Lily sitting on the holding bench, knees tucked to her chest, humming faintly to herself. There was no fear in her eyes, no remorse, just the blank stare of someone who had already accepted what they'd done. He thought about Rebecca's journal. "Something about her scares me." He finally understood what she meant. The fear wasn't about teenage rebellion, it was the quiet kind. The kind that grows when you realize someone you love might not feel the same way back. As the clock crept past midnight, Hale's reflection merged with hers through the glass, and for a moment, he felt the weight of every unanswered question pressing down on him. The evidence already pointed to her, the gun, the timing, the lie, but evidence alone couldn't explain why. And that was what haunted him most. Because sometimes the hardest thing in his job wasn't catching the killer. It was accepting who the killer turned out to be. By the time the sun rose over Miami the next morning, Lily Morgan's face was already everywhere, on every news channel, splashed across social media and replaying in endless loops of headlines and speculation. 14-year-old genius or cold-blooded killer? One anchor asked. Another called her the quiet prodigy who fooled everyone. The public couldn't look away. They wanted to know how a girl with perfect grades, a spotless reputation, and a smile that looked innocent enough for a school brochure could possibly be sitting in a police station accused of murder. Detective Marcus Hale didn't need the headlines to remind him how surreal it all was. He'd spent the last 8 hours rereading Lily's school files, her report cards, and teacher statements. Every document painted the same picture: an overachiever, well-behaved, polite, a child any parent would be proud of. There were glowing notes about her essays, her science fair victories, her volunteer hours at the library. Yet behind that perfect record, Hale sensed something else, something calculated. "Nobody's that perfect," he muttered, flipping through another report. "Perfection hides something." Rebecca Morgan had raised Lily alone since the divorce, and by all accounts, she was devoted, maybe too devoted. As Hale spoke to neighbors and family friends, a pattern emerged. Rebecca had been strict but caring, the kind of parent who hovered, not out of control but out of fear. She'd worked long hours at her pediatric clinic, but when she was home, she monitored Lily's every move, the apps she downloaded, the people she texted, even how long she stayed online. Some called it good parenting. Others saw it as suffocating. One neighbor remembered Rebecca once saying, "If I don't keep her close, I'll lose her completely." Hale couldn't shake that line from his mind. He'd seen it before, that desperate dance between love and control that can turn a home into a battlefield. The problem was, when you try too hard to protect someone, sometimes you end up becoming the very thing they want to escape. At school, Lily's teachers spoke of her like she was destined for greatness. A prodigy, one said, but intense, almost unnervingly so. Her English teacher recalled how she'd once written an essay about manipulation, not in fiction but in real life. The paper was titled, "Control is just another word for fear." Hale stared at the line highlighted in red ink. "People pretend to love you when they want something from you. That's why I trust logic, not emotion." It was eerie, coldly mature, the words of someone who understood how power worked and maybe how to use it. As Hale sat back in his chair, the thin morning light filtering through the blinds, he tried to picture the girl everyone described. Straight-A student, loved by teachers, quiet in class, never a problem. It was easy to see why nobody saw the storm building behind her calm exterior. On the surface, she was perfect. But perfection is fragile, and once it cracks, what spills out can be terrifying. Down the hall, Lily sat in the juvenile interview room, her small frame lost in the oversized chair. Her posture was straight, her face blank, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She looked like a child waiting for a parent-teacher conference, not a suspect in a homicide investigation. A psychologist from the department's youth division, Dr. Elena Vasquez, sat with her. Hale watched through the glass, studying every twitch, every pause, every breath. "She's not scared," Vasquez said quietly. "She's analyzing." "Analyzing what?" Hale asked. "Everything. You, me, the room, what to say, what not to. She's not reacting emotionally, she's thinking strategically." It was exactly what he feared. When the interview began, Vasquez tried to connect first. She spoke softly, asked about school, about Lily's favorite subjects, her friends. Lily answered politely, but offered nothing of substance. Her voice carried that same eerie calm, too flat for grief, too steady for fear. When asked about her mother, she said, "She was strict." When asked if she missed her, she paused only for a second before replying, "I guess so." Hale leaned forward in his chair, his stomach tightening. "You guess so?" he muttered under his breath. Most kids, even the angriest ones, would have broken at that question. But Lily didn't. Later, when the conversation turned to her relationship with Rebecca, something shifted. Lily's eyes flickered, the first spark of emotion Hale had seen. "She never listened to me," she said quietly. "Everything I did was wrong. If I stayed up too late, wrong. If I got a B instead of an A, wrong. If I texted a friend she didn't like, wrong. She wanted to own me." Her voice trembled slightly on the last word. Not from sadness, from anger. Dr. Vasquez asked gently, "Did she ever hurt you?" Lily looked up. "No, but she tried to control everything I did, and that's worse." The room went still. Hale scribbled a note. Perception of control as threat. He'd seen the same pattern in adult offenders. People who justified violence not out of impulse, but from a twisted sense of liberation. When the interview ended, Lily didn't ask to go home. She didn't ask for her father. She asked, once again, for her phone. And when Hale told her it was still in evidence, she simply said, "Then can I have another one?" It was the first time he'd ever felt a chill from a child's voice. It wasn't arrogance. It was detachment. The kind that comes when empathy has shut off completely. As she was escorted to temporary holding, Hale sat alone with her file. There were no police reports of abuse, no behavioral problems, no signs of trauma. Nothing to explain what could drive a child to commit an act like this, but in the world Hale knew best. Evil didn't always grow in chaos. Sometimes it grew quietly, in well-kept homes where perfection left no room for mistakes, and love became something you had to earn. Meanwhile, the media frenzy was only growing louder. News stations camped outside the police station, journalists shouting questions as officers came and went. The phrase, "the perfect daughter," had begun trending online. A cruel irony that seemed to both sensationalize and sanitize the tragedy. Talk shows dissected every photo of Lily and Rebecca, searching for meaning in smiles, body language, posture. People wanted answers. They wanted a reason. But the truth, the real truth, was more uncomfortable than any headline could admit. Detective Hale wasn't interested in the headlines. He was interested in the story behind them, the small, unseen fractures that had been forming for years. He went back to the Morgans' house that afternoon, walking slowly through the rooms now emptied of evidence markers, but still thick with silence. Lily's bedroom looked like something from a magazine. White walls, color-coded shelves, perfectly folded blankets. But on the desk sat a small cork board filled with printed screenshots, motivational quotes, study tips, digital goals, and in the corner a phrase cut from a magazine: "Freedom is earned, not given." Hale stared at it for a long time. Freedom. The word had come up again and again, in her essay, her statements, her actions. To Lily, freedom wasn't just a concept. It was an obsession. When he opened her closet, he found a locked box tucked behind a stack of neatly folded clothes. Inside were handwritten notes, messages Lily had written to herself. They weren't diaries, they were instructions. Don't trust anyone who says they know what's best for you. If they take your power, take it back. Never let them see fear. Each line felt like a manifesto. The handwriting was perfect, controlled, even graceful, as though the act of writing them was part of her discipline. Standing there in that pristine room, Hale finally began to understand what Rebecca had been up against. This wasn't a child lashing out. This was a child who had built an entire ideology around independence, one that saw control as oppression. Rebecca's rules, her structure, her attempts to guide her daughter, all of it had become the enemy in Lily's mind. And once that transformation happened, love no longer mattered. Only winning did. When Hale left the house that evening, the sun was low, spilling long shadows across the driveway. He paused for a moment at the end of the path, looking back at the window of Lily's room glowing faintly in the dim light. The blinds fluttered slightly in the breeze, the way a curtain does in a house that's no longer alive. The perfect daughter, he whispered to himself, or the perfect storm. When Detective Marcus Hale returned to the precinct that night, the city had already sunk into its heavy Miami darkness, thick, humid, and restless. The building felt different after hours, quieter. The rhythm of the day had faded into the low hum of computer fans and distant murmurs. Down the corridor, the faint blue glow spilling from the digital forensics lab cut through the dim hallway like a lighthouse beam. Inside, Javier Ruiz sat hunched over his monitors, his eyes reflecting strings of code and message threads that scrolled endlessly across the screens. He didn't look up as Hale entered. "You're going to want to see this," he said quietly, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. Hale stepped closer, scanning the screen. What he saw didn't make sense at first. A collection of usernames, all variations of the same alias, Novasky 14. "This is her," Ruiz explained. "Lily's online identity, or rather, identities." Each account carried the same tone, articulate, defensive, philosophical, but each one lived in a different corner of the internet. Instagram, Discord, an encrypted chat forum used by hackers, a private messaging app that didn't even appear on the home screen unless you entered a specific code. "She built layers," Ruiz continued, each one hiding behind another. Hale read through one of the posts. The words were sharp, too mature for a teenager, and chillingly composed. Parents pretend they know what's best, but what they really want is control. They use love as a leash. Knowledge is freedom, and freedom is worth any cost. He didn't know whether to be impressed or terrified. It wasn't the kind of writing you expect from a 14-year-old. It was manifesto writing, deliberate, coherent, purposeful. "She wasn't just angry," Ruiz said, scrolling further. "She was building a philosophy, teaching herself how to disappear online, how to mask her location, how to cover her digital tracks." Another post read, "If they take your phone, they take your power, so never let them." Hale exhaled slowly, a familiar heaviness settling in his chest. "She didn't just hide from her mother," he said softly. "She built an entire world to replace her." Scrolling further, they found messages exchanged between Lily and anonymous users, people with usernames like Rebel Zero, Eclipse Kid, and Data Ghost. The conversations were cryptic but revealing, littered with code words and abstract ideas about control and rebellion. In one thread, Lily wrote, Sometimes control is the only way to feel safe. The reply came seconds later. Then take it back. It wasn't a direct command, but it was enough. It was validation. The kind of quiet permission that can push someone already teetering on the edge. Ruiz zoomed in on one username, Rebel Zero. "This one," he said, "pinged from a Miami IP address a few times." Hale nodded slowly. So someone nearby was feeding her this. "Maybe," Ruiz said, shrugging. "Or maybe it was just another kid. Hard to know where the mask ends and the person begins." The next morning, Hale met with Daniel Morgan, Lily's father, who had flown in overnight from Seattle. Daniel looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed and sunken, his tie loose around his neck. He carried himself like a man trying to convince himself this wasn't real. "Rebecca loved her," he said quickly, "but she was too hard on her, too controlled." His tone wavered between sorrow and resentment. She tracked her phone, blocked her social media, read her messages. "I told her you can't treat a teenager like a suspect, but Rebecca—" He stopped, rubbing his forehead. Rebecca was terrified. She thought Lily was slipping away. Hale studied him for a moment. "When was the last time you saw your daughter?" Daniel hesitated. "Almost a year ago. She didn't want to visit, said it was boring. I thought she was just being dramatic. I never imagined—" His voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. When Daniel left, Hale stayed at his desk, staring out at the rain-streaked windows. The case no longer felt like a crime scene. It felt like a mirror reflecting something bigger. A mother terrified of losing control, a daughter desperate to gain it, and a father too far away to stop either one. That afternoon, Ruiz called Hale back to the lab. "Found something new," he said. On the screen was a hidden folder named Project R. Inside were screenshots, typed notes, and photographs. "She took pictures of the house," Ruiz explained, clicking through them. "Angles, lighting, timestamps." Hale felt his stomach turn as he scrolled further. Notes about the gun safe, details about her mother's evening schedule, even reminders like dinner prep 6:45, opportunity. One file froze him completely. It was a digital note written 2 weeks before the murder. "She keeps the gun in the safe. I can use it. Clean. Fast. She won't believe I'd do it until it's done." Hale's hands went cold as he read another. "If they take my freedom, I'll take theirs first." For a long moment, neither man spoke. The quiet in the lab was suffocating. "When you said she was methodical," Ruiz murmured, "I didn't think you meant this." Hale leaned against the desk, his voice barely above a whisper. "She wasn't just angry," he said. "She was planning." There was no rage in her writing, no emotional outburst, just cold precision. The kind that made him wonder whether she even saw it as murder or simply as reclaiming power. By evening, the case had exploded across every major network. News anchors speculated about her mental state. Pundits argued about parenting in the digital age. Psychologists filled panels dissecting her behavior from a distance. Some painted Lily as a manipulative prodigy. Others said she was a victim of overprotection and technology's influence. Social media turned her into a symbol. The perfect daughter trending for all the wrong reasons. Hale hated every headline. To him, they weren't dealing with a monster or a martyr. They were dealing with a human tragedy, one that had been building long before a gun was ever fired. That night, he revisited the interview tapes. He watched Lily's face again, frame by frame. The subtle tensing of her jaw whenever her mother's name was mentioned. The faint lift of her shoulders whenever her phone came up. It was as if those two subjects, her mother and her phone, represented opposite poles of her world, control and freedom. Dr. Vasquez's voice echoed in his mind from earlier. "She's not psychotic, Marcus. She's not delusional. She's detached and obsessed with autonomy. she sees any control as an attack on her identity. Hale remembered asking, "So she killed for freedom?" And the psychologist's soft reply, "In her mind, maybe that's exactly what she did." Hours later, unable to shake the unease, Hale found himself driving back to Palm Vista Drive. The neighborhood looked peaceful again, as if tragedy had already faded into memory. The police tape was gone, the lights off. The palm trees swayed gently under the moonlight, their long shadows stretching across the pavement. He parked near the curb, stepping out into the humid stillness. The house stood there, silent, immaculate, empty. He walked slowly toward it, his shoes crunching softly against the gravel. The faint smell of rain and citrus still lingered in the air, ghost-like. Standing before the window where he'd first seen Rebecca's body, Hale felt a hollow ache in his chest. He thought about her final moments, how quick it must have been, how sudden. No argument, no chance to beg or reason. 1 second alive, the next gone, taken by the person she'd sacrificed everything for. He thought about Lily, sitting now in a cold holding room miles away, her face blank, her future sealed. What haunted him most wasn't the brutality of what she did, but how easily she seemed to have accepted it. There were no signs of panic, no denial, no regret, only detachment, like she had simply deleted her mother the way she might delete a file from her phone. As Hale turned to leave, something caught his eye near the curb, a small glint in the dirt. He crouched down and brushed away the soil. It was a tiny phone charm shaped like a silver butterfly, half buried and tarnished. He recognized it immediately from the evidence photos. Lily had worn it looped around her phone case. For a moment, he just held it in his hand, feeling the smooth metal press into his palm. It was delicate, fragile, a child's trinket. And yet here it was, dropped beside the house where childhood had ended. He slipped it carefully into his pocket, unsure why. Maybe as evidence. Maybe as a reminder. When he drove away, the streetlights blurred into streaks through his windshield, and the city stretched endlessly ahead. Somewhere between guilt and exhaustion, he whispered to himself, "The perfect daughter." Then, almost bitterly, he added, "Or maybe just a girl no one really understood in time." The morning after Lily's arrest, the Morgan house stood silent under a gray Miami sky. The once bright coral walls looked dull now, like the life had drained out of them. Inside, crime scene technicians moved quietly, their voices hushed, their gloved hands careful. The smell of cleaning solution had replaced the metallic tang of blood, but it didn't erase what had happened there. The house wasn't just a home anymore. It was evidence. Every corner, every surface, every object told a story of something that didn't add up. And Detective Marcus Hale was determined to find out what it was. Hale moved slowly through the living room, his notepad tucked under his arm. The space was immaculate. Too immaculate. Family photos lined the mantel, smiling faces at school events, birthdays, vacations. Lily's image appeared in nearly every frame, her smile bright but oddly rehearsed. None of the photos showed the candid, messy warmth of a normal household. They were all perfectly posed, like proof of happiness rather than the thing itself. Hale stopped at one in particular. Rebecca and Lily at a beach, standing side by side. Rebecca was laughing, sun in her hair, but Lily's expression was fixed, almost tight. A smile painted on because it was expected, not because it was felt. He turned toward the kitchen, where sunlight streamed faintly through the blinds, catching on the tiled floor. The spot where Rebecca had fallen had already been scrubbed clean, but Hale could still see the faint outline of the crime in his mind. The fallen glass, the phone, the single bullet casing that had rolled against the counter's baseboard. He'd been in hundreds of scenes like this, but something about this one kept tugging at him. It wasn't the brutality. It was the stillness. No struggle, no forced entry, no hesitation. The act had been quiet, deliberate, almost surgical. He looked at the spot where the gun must have been raised and thought of the small hands that had held it. 14 years old, barely taller than the countertop. And yet she'd done it without missing a shot. The forensics team had finished their physical sweep days earlier, but Hale wanted a psychological one. He believed that houses remembered, that they carried the residue of the lives lived inside them. Some places whispered truth if you listened closely enough. Upstairs, Lily's bedroom felt like a museum of order. The bed was perfectly made, the books alphabetized, the desk arranged with military precision. On the corkboard above the desk were small, neatly pinned photos of study groups, art projects, and one photo of Rebecca standing beside her daughter during a science fair, holding a ribbon. In the corner of the board, Hale noticed something subtle, a photo tacked upside down. It was of the two of them in the kitchen, laughing, Lily holding a cake she had baked for her mother's birthday. Why turn it upside down? Anger? Rebellion? Or maybe something deeper, rejection. Hale opened a drawer on the desk and found notebooks stacked in perfect order. Most were filled with homework and tidy notes, but one stood out, black cover, unlabeled. Inside, the handwriting was smaller, sharper. The entries weren't diary-like confessions. They were analyses, observations. People believe what they want to see. If you act calm, no one asks questions. Fear is predictable. Control is not. Each line read like a psychological experiment written from the inside out. He turned the page and found something chilling. A simple sketch of the house. Every room labeled, with arrows indicating lines of sight. The windows, the mirrors, the corners. It looked like she had studied her own home as if it were a stage set for a play. Downstairs, Sergeant Lopez was walking the perimeter, jotting her own notes. "You ever seen anything like this, Marcus?" she asked. Hale shook his head. "Not at this age," he said. "This isn't teenage rebellion. It's something colder, detached." Lopez frowned. She planned it in her own home, lived here for years, ate dinner with her mother in that kitchen every night. Hale nodded slowly. That's what makes it worse. To her, this wasn't a home anymore. It was a system, and systems can be controlled. As the two detectives continued their sweep, a small detail caught Lopez's eye, the security camera in the hallway. The lens was cracked. "Looks like someone disabled it," she said. Hale crouched down to inspect it. The wires had been deliberately cut, not torn. Clean, precise. "When?" he asked. Ruiz's report had mentioned the system was armed, but the cameras hadn't transmitted footage after 6:30 p.m. "Roughly half an hour before the shooting," Lopez confirmed. Hale stood slowly, exhaling. She didn't just stage the scene after. She started preparing before. They went through Rebecca's study next, a small, warmly lit room filled with books and patient files. On the desk sat a framed photo of her and Lily when she was a toddler, cheeks smudged with cake, both laughing. It was the only picture in the house that looked unposed. Hale stared at it for a moment before noticing something else, a printed email sitting half-tucked under a medical journal. It was addressed to a school counselor. The subject line read, "Concern about my daughter's behavior." The email was dated 2 weeks before the murder. Rebecca had written about Lily's withdrawal, her secretive phone habits, her mood swings. She had even requested a school evaluation for possible emotional dysregulation. Hale felt his stomach tighten as he read the final line. "I'm worried I might be losing her, and I don't know how to stop it." He folded the paper carefully and slid it into his file. A mother asking for help, and no one answering in time. That was what broke him most about these cases. The warning signs were always there, but they were small, quiet, easy to dismiss until it was too late. Outside, dark clouds were beginning to gather over the neighborhood. The palm leaves rattled softly as the first drops of rain tapped against the roof. Hale stood by the doorway, staring at the street where Evelyn Morales had made the 911 call just days earlier. It was peaceful now, deceptively so. Families drove by on their way to school, unaware that the house beside them had become a landmark of tragedy. He imagined how many times Rebecca must have stood on this same porch, waiting for her daughter to come home, rehearsing the same plea every parent has made at some point. Just talk to me. But Hale knew that by the time parents start pleading, the distance has already set in. Love becomes something translated through rules, and rebellion becomes the only language left to answer it. The Morgans' home was more than a crime scene. It was a reflection of something larger, a generation caught between the digital world and the real one, between control and chaos, between being seen and being understood. When he left the house that afternoon, the rain had started to fall in steady sheets, soft but relentless. Hale stood for a moment in the drizzle, staring back at the house through the haze. The windows reflected the gray sky like mirrors, blank and unfeeling. That was when he understood why this chapter of the investigation would come to be called the House of Glass. Because from the outside, it had always looked perfect, polished, intact, transparent. But behind those windows, everything fragile had already cracked. That evening, as rain fell over the city, Detective Marcus Hale sat alone in his office, the blinds drawn, the desk lamp casting a narrow cone of light across stacks of files. The hum of the building around him had quieted. Most of the precinct had gone home. But Hale stayed, unable to let go of the feeling that the Morgan case still had one more secret to give up. He had been a detective long enough to know when something about a crime scene didn't line up. And in this one, the silence spoke louder than any evidence. There was too much precision, too much absence of chaos. He lit a cigarette, an old habit he'd promised to break, and stared at the evidence board pinned across the wall. Rebecca and Lily's photos sat side by side, the string connecting them like a taut thread. He thought again about the broken security camera in the hallway. Why disable it? Why cut the wire half an hour before the murder? Lily had already planned to fake a burglary, so what was she trying to hide from a camera that would have supported her story? It didn't make sense, not unless there was another camera. He grabbed the home's floor plan from the file and traced it with his finger, remembering every detail of the rooms he'd walked through. Then he saw it, a notation in Rebecca's study. Home network, interior access point. Hale's pulse quickened. Most people didn't realize that modern security systems stored backups in hidden folders on routers or cloud accounts. If Rebecca was as cautious as she seemed, there was a chance that the footage still existed somewhere, buried in data Lily hadn't been able to erase. He grabbed his coat and headed straight for the forensics lab, rain drumming against the windows as thunder rolled in the distance. Javier Ruiz was still there, earbuds in, half asleep over his keyboard. Hale dropped the folder on the desk. "We need to check the router from the Morgan house again," he said. Ruiz blinked, confused. "Already did. Nothing transmitted after 6:30. "Not transmitted," Hale said. "Stored. Check for internal cache or a secondary feed. Some of those newer systems mirror data to hidden folders." Ruiz sighed but started typing anyway. Lines of code streamed down the screen as he searched. A few minutes later, his eyes widened. "Wait, there's a backup log, hidden under a disguised file extension." Hale leaned closer. "Can you open it?" Ruiz nodded slowly. "Yeah, but it's corrupted. Give me a minute." For several tense minutes, the only sounds were the clicking of keys and the rain against the glass. Then a small video window appeared on the screen, grainy, flickering, but intact. "This is from the camera by the staircase," Ruiz said. Hale watched as the timestamp appeared. 6:41 p.m., the night of the murder. The video showed Rebecca walking into the kitchen, setting down her keys, and opening a bottle of wine. The footage was silent but clear. A few seconds later, Lily appeared in the hallway, still in her school uniform, holding something in her hands. Her mother's phone. She stood there for a moment, just watching. Her expression was unreadable. Then she walked toward the kitchen. Hale's hand tightened around the edge of the desk. He knew what was coming. Rebecca turned, startled, and said something they couldn't hear. Lily responded, calm, deliberate. Then she raised her hand, and for a brief second, the flash of metal caught the kitchen light. A single movement, a single recoil. Rebecca fell instantly. The camera flickered as the motion sensor reacted to the flash. Then Lily stepped closer, crouched beside her mother's body, and stared for several seconds before turning and walking out of frame. The feed ended there. The footage was short, no more than 20 seconds, but it was enough to remove any doubt. The room fell silent. Ruiz exhaled slowly. Jesus, she didn't even hesitate. Hale didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at the frozen final frame. Rebecca's body on the floor, Lily's shadow stretching across the tiles. He'd seen countless murders in his career, but there was something about this one that felt colder than any of them. It wasn't the act itself. It was the lack of reaction afterward. No panic, no remorse. Just the quiet precision of someone executing a decision already made long ago. He took a deep breath, steadying himself, and said quietly, "Save it. Encrypt it. No leaks." Ruiz nodded, his face pale. When Hale stepped outside, the rain had eased into a steady drizzle. The city glowed with reflected light, slick streets, neon signs blurred by mist. He stood under the awning for a long moment, staring out at the wet pavement. The case had crossed a line now. There was no question of who, only the question of why. That was the part that refused to make sense. How could a child, a girl who excelled at school, who volunteered at the library, who'd never once broken a rule, turn into this? What switch had flipped? The next morning, Hale brought the footage to the state attorney's office. The reaction was immediate. Within hours, the video was secured under strict confidentiality, and prosecutors began preparing charges. But Hale wasn't satisfied. The footage proved guilt. Yes, but not motive. Something in him couldn't stop asking questions. He requested a psychological evaluation for Lily, and Dr. Vasquez was assigned to conduct it. When Vasquez entered the interrogation room later that day, Lily looked up and smiled faintly. "Are we doing another test?" she asked, almost polite. "Something like that," Vasquez said. The session lasted over 2 hours. When it ended, Vasquez came to find Hale, her expression unreadable. "You were right," she said quietly. "She's not insane, not even close. She understands everything she's done." Hale frowned. "Then why? Why her own mother?" Vasquez hesitated. "Because she believes she was being controlled. Every rule, every limit, every locked door, she saw it as an attack on her independence. To her, this wasn't murder, it was reclamation, a declaration of autonomy." Hale shook his head. "You're saying she killed her mother to feel free?" Vasquez nodded slowly. "And what's worse, she feels justified." That night, Hale sat in his car outside the precinct, the rain tapping against the windshield. He replayed Vasquez's words in his mind. Justified. It was a word he'd heard killers use before. Gang leaders, corrupt CEOs, even soldiers, but never a 14-year-old girl. He lit another cigarette, watching the smoke curl upward into the dark. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed and faded into the night. He thought about the Morgan house again, the spotless kitchen, the framed photos, the illusion of perfection, the house of glass. It had looked so solid, so safe. But like glass, it had only taken one crack for the whole thing to shatter. He thought about all the parents who would watch this story unfold and see a reflection of their own fears. How much freedom is too much? How much control is too little? He wondered how many families were living in their own houses of glass, fragile, silent, pretending everything was fine until one day it wasn't. As the clock on the dashboard ticked past midnight, Hale finally started the car. The city lights shimmered across the wet streets as he drove away. He didn't know yet that the next phase of the investigation would take him deeper, into the digital world Lily had built, into the messages she had deleted but not forgotten, and into the psychological maze where reason and darkness had become the same thing. But as he disappeared into the rain-soaked night, one truth had already settled deep in his gut. The glass had broken, and now there was no putting it back together. The digital age had changed everything about detective work. What used to take months of field investigation could now unravel in hours on a glowing screen. Every click, every message, every fragment of metadata was a breadcrumb, and Detective Marcus Hale had learned to follow them like a hunter through fog. The difference with this case, though, was that the trail wasn't left by an adult trying to hide a crime. It was left by a 14-year-old girl who understood the internet better than most seasoned hackers. And what she left behind wasn't a trail at all. It was a maze. Inside the dim-lit forensics lab, rows of monitors flickered with lines of code, timestamps, and browser histories. The hum of the servers filled the room like a heartbeat. Javier Ruiz sat surrounded by the chaos, sipping his third coffee of the morning. "She's good," he muttered, scrolling through the data. "Really good. Half this stuff's wiped clean, and not with basic delete commands. She used overwrite scripts, layered encryption, VPN chains bouncing through 5 different countries." He shook his head, both impressed and uneasy. "I've seen adult cybercrime suspects who couldn't cover their tracks this well." Hale stood behind him, arms crossed. "But she missed something," he said. "She always does. Everyone does." What Lily hadn't known was that no amount of deletion could erase behavior. The internet, in its own way, remembered. Ruiz opened a recovered log from Lily's tablet, its contents pieced together from cached fragments. The list of searches sent a chill down both their spines. How to make a murder look like a robbery. Ways to erase fingerprints. How to fake crying during police questions. Hale stared at the screen, his jaw tightening. "She rehearsed everything," he said quietly. "Even her emotions." Scrolling further, Ruiz found something more disturbing. A sequence of text strings that weren't ordinary searches. They were scripts, written in basic coding language. "This," Ruiz explained, "is a bot she wrote to auto-delete messages every time her phone's battery dropped below 10%. She built it herself." Hale blinked. "She was 14. Ruiz nodded grimly. "Yeah, and apparently smarter than most of the guys who write these for a living." But the deeper they went, the more they began to see patterns. Digital fingerprints of a mind not just trying to hide guilt, but trying to create a version of truth she could control. On her social accounts, Lily had rewritten her narrative in real time. Posts went up and vanished minutes later, replaced with new ones that subtly reframed her as the victim, a daughter of a controlling mother, trapped, misunderstood. It wasn't just concealment, it was manipulation. She hadn't only deleted evidence, she'd built a story for the world to find if she ever needed it. "She was writing her defense before she even pulled the trigger," Hale murmured. By mid-morning, they'd traced her digital footprints back 6 months. That was when the first major shift had occurred. Lily had joined a private chat group under the alias Nova Sky 14. The group's theme, digital sovereignty, a euphemism for total online anonymity. It was filled with users claiming to be young rebels, coders, activists. But under the surface, it was a breeding ground for darker ideologies: defiance, manipulation, control. The messages scrolled across the screen, their tone alternating between philosophical and sinister. One user wrote, "Freedom means no one owns you, not even the ones who say they love you." Another replied, "If they can't control you, they'll destroy you first." Strike before they do. The group had hundreds of threads. Hale scanned through them, his eyes catching on Lily's username again and again. She wasn't just following, she was leading. Her posts were detailed, analytical, confident. She wasn't looking for validation, he said. She was looking for recruits. Ruiz looked up from the monitor. You think she was being groomed by someone? Hale nodded slowly. Maybe. Or maybe she was doing the grooming. They focused on one user in particular, Rebel Zero, the same one whose IP address had pinged from Miami weeks earlier. Their messages with Lily were longer, more personal. It started with simple conversations about technology, about feeling misunderstood, but soon the tone changed. Lily began sharing more, about her mother, her anger, her belief that she was being suffocated. She's keeping me in a cage, one message read. Even my phone isn't mine anymore. Rebel Zero responded, then take back your power. You're smarter than her. You can control your own story. That exchange replayed in Hale's head like a ticking clock. The phrase, take back your power, became a mantra, the seed of everything that followed. Find out who this user is, he said. Trace the IP. I don't care how many masks they're using. Ruiz worked for hours, tracking digital shadows through encrypted networks and proxy servers. Finally, he looked up. Got it. The IP isn't from some underground forum. It's a public Wi-Fi node, Coral Springs Public Library. Hale froze. You're saying she was talking to someone in the same city? Ruiz nodded. Or in the same room. That revelation shifted everything. The digital distance they had imagined between Lily and this mysterious mentor collapsed into terrifying proximity. The next day, Hale drove to the library, the same one Lily volunteered at twice a week. It was quiet and unassuming, filled with rows of dusty books and the faint hum of air conditioning. The librarian, a kind woman in her 50s, recognized Lily immediately. She was one of our best helpers, she said. Always polite, always smiling. She spent a lot of time on the computers, but that's what kids do these days. Hale asked to see the workstation logs, and within an hour, Ruiz confirmed the horrifying possibility. The messages between Nova Sky 14 and Rebel Zero had been sent from the same computer. Lily had been talking to herself. Hale sat there for a long moment, stunned. She created her own mentor, he said finally, her own voice of validation. Ruiz nodded, equally shaken. Every message from Rebel Zero was her, just another account. She was giving herself permission. The realization hit Hale like a wave. Lily hadn't been groomed by anyone. She'd groomed herself, creating an illusion of guidance, of justification, to reinforce what she already wanted to believe. It was a psychological loop, a hall of mirrors built from loneliness, anger, and brilliance twisted inward. That night, Hale sat with Dr. Vasquez in the precinct conference room, both of them exhausted but unwilling to stop. She created her own echo chamber, Vasquez said softly. The internet didn't corrupt her. It amplified her isolation. Every time her mother said no, she went online and found a reason to say yes to herself. Hale leaned back, staring at the ceiling. She built a world where she was always right. Vasquez nodded. And once she believed that, there was no one left to stop her. Outside, lightning flickered in the distance, illuminating the city in white flashes. For Hale, the pieces were starting to connect, not just in evidence, but in meaning. This wasn't just a story about a girl who killed her mother. It was a story about a generation living behind screens, rewriting their identities one post at a time, losing sight of where reality ended and self-perception began. Before leaving for the night, Hale opened the case file one more time. Among the printed screenshots of Lily's messages, one phrase kept standing out. If they can't control me, they can't save me. He read it again and again, the words echoing in his mind like a warning. Maybe Lily had believed that freedom was worth anything. even the destruction of the one person trying to save her. Maybe she truly thought she'd won. But in her victory, all she'd done was cage herself in a different kind of prison. One made not of walls or bars, but of digital shadows that would haunt her forever. The following morning broke gray and heavy, the kind of Miami morning that felt neither alive nor dead, just suspended in its own humidity. Detective Marcus Hale arrived at the precinct early, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his mind already circling the case like a hawk over restless water. Sleep hadn't come easily. The revelation that Lily had been her own digital accomplice, her own manipulator, had shaken him more than he wanted to admit. There was something profoundly unsettling about it. The way a child could create an entire world of mirrors to justify her darkness. It wasn't just deception. It was self-deception at a level that bordered on genius. Ruiz was already in the lab when Hale walked in, his fingers flying across the keyboard, screens glowing in soft blue light. "Morning," Hale said, his voice gravelly. "Please tell me you've got something new." Ruiz didn't look up. "Maybe," he said. "After last night, I kept digging into her cloud backups. Even the hidden folders synced through temporary cache storage. Most of it was encrypted, but I cracked a few." Hale moved closer. "And?" Ruiz tapped a key. A new folder opened on the screen. The title read simply, "Private, not for anyone." Inside were 6 short video files, each time-stamped within the 2 weeks leading up to the murder. Hale felt a chill move down his spine. "Play them," he said. The first video flickered to life, grainy and handheld, clearly recorded from Lily's phone. She was sitting cross-legged on her bed, the glow from her laptop illuminating her face. Her hair was tied back messily, her eyes swollen as if she hadn't slept. "I don't even know why I'm doing this," she said, her voice quiet, almost fragile. "I guess I just want to have proof. Proof that I'm not crazy. Proof that it's her." She paused, breathing shallowly. "She doesn't see me. She sees what she wants me to be. Every time I try to tell her I'm fine, she looks at me like I'm lying. Maybe I am, but only because she never believes me anyway." She let out a short, bitter laugh. "She says she loves me. But if love feels like being watched every second, maybe love is the problem." Hale leaned in closer, the sound of her voice crawling beneath his skin. There was no rage in it, no hysteria, just exhaustion. She looked like someone teetering between defiance and despair. The next video was darker, recorded late at night. The camera was angled toward the ceiling, only her voice audible. "She took my phone again," she whispered. "She says it's for my own good. She doesn't get it. It's the only place I exist. Without it, I don't know who I am. Maybe she's scared of that. Maybe she should be." Her tone shifted, colder now. "You can't cage someone and then be surprised when they learn to break locks." The third video showed a flicker of something else. Control. Lily sat at her desk, typing furiously, her expression calm but intent. "I'm tired of begging," she said. "Begging to be seen. Begging to be understood. Maybe some people only understand loss. Maybe that's the only language they listen to." Hale felt a knot in his throat. These weren't just recordings. They were declarations. The slow unraveling of a girl who believed she was invisible until she decided to become unforgettable. By the fourth video, the tone had changed again. The lighting was softer. She looked composed, almost serene. "It's weird," she said, "how easy it is to stop feeling. Like one day you're angry and then suddenly you're just nothing. I thought I'd be scared of what I'm thinking about, but I'm not. I'm calm. I feel like I've already done it." She smiled faintly, almost peacefully. Maybe that's freedom, not caring anymore. Hale froze, the air in the room thickening around him. She wasn't just planning, she had already accepted it. In her mind, the act had already happened. The fifth video was the hardest to watch. Lily sat in the dark, her voice trembling. "She said she's going to call the school counselor again," she said. She thinks I need help. Maybe I do. But she doesn't get that the only thing I need help with is getting away from her. She rubbed her temples, her breathing erratic. Sometimes I dream she's gone. And when I wake up, I feel relief. And then guilt. And then relief again. The screen shook as she turned the camera off abruptly. The silence that followed was deafening. When Ruiz clicked on the final video, the timestamp made Hale's stomach drop. It was recorded just 4 hours before the shooting. The footage opened with Lily standing near the window, the morning light behind her. Her tone was calm, eerily calm. "It's funny," she said softly, "how everyone says they'd do anything for freedom. But they don't really mean it. Not when it costs something. But me? I mean it." She looked straight into the camera. "I don't hate her. I just can't let her win." Her hand reached forward and the screen went black. For several seconds, neither man spoke. Ruiz finally broke the silence. "She documented everything," he said quietly. "Every thought, every justification. Like she wanted someone to find it." Hale nodded slowly, his eyes still fixed on the dark screen. "Not someone," he said. "Everyone. She wanted the world to understand her version before anyone else could tell it." They sat in silence for a long while, the weight of her words hanging heavy in the air. It wasn't just evidence, it was a glimpse into a fractured consciousness, a child who had convinced herself that control equaled survival. Dr. Vasquez joined them later that day to review the recordings. She watched each one without speaking, her face unreadable. When the final video ended, she turned to Hale. "This isn't sociopathy," she said softly. "It's disassociation. She separated herself from her emotions because feeling them hurt too much. That's what makes it dangerous. She's logical, not impulsive." Hale rubbed his temples, exhausted. "Logical enough to plan her mother's death," he said bitterly. Vasquez nodded. "Yes, and logical enough to believe it was mercy." That night, Hale replayed the footage again, alone in his office. He noticed details he'd missed before, the faint reflection of a journal on her desk, the way her fingers trembled whenever she mentioned her mother's name, the subtle shifts in tone when she said the word freedom. It wasn't rage driving her, it was obsession. Obsession with autonomy, with identity, with control. In her mind, she hadn't destroyed her mother. She'd erased a symbol of the life that told her who she was supposed to be. By midnight, Hale found himself staring out the window, the city stretching endlessly below him. The digital glow of the skyline felt almost ironic. Millions of screens flickering in the dark, each one holding a story, a secret, a version of truth. He thought about how many other teenagers were out there, living parallel lives online, rewriting themselves in pixels and code. He thought about parents, lost in the gap between understanding and intrusion, trying to keep up with worlds they couldn't see. The Morgan case wasn't just about one tragedy. It was a reflection of something much larger, a generation born into light but raised in shadow. Before heading home, Hale opened his notebook and scribbled a single line across the page. She wanted to be seen, but only through her own lens. Then he closed it, knowing the next step would be the hardest, confronting Lily with her own recordings. He wasn't sure what scared him more, the possibility that she'd break down in remorse or that she wouldn't feel anything at all. Detective Marcus Hale had seen hundreds of digital footprints before, the kind left by impulsive criminals who thought deleting a message meant it was gone. But Lily Morgan's case was different. Every digital trace she left felt deliberate, like the work of someone playing chess against herself. After days of combing through encrypted folders and cloud backups, Javier Ruiz finally unearthed something Hale hadn't expected to find: a string of deleted text messages between Lily and her closest friend, Ava Rowe. The chat thread had been manually wiped from Lily's phone, but fragments of it remained preserved on Ava's backup, hidden inside an unlinked account. Ruiz's voice cracked the silence of the lab when he said, "You're going to want to read this." The messages started innocently enough, two teenage girls venting about school, homework, and parental rules. But the tone began to shift around mid-July, about 3 weeks before the shooting. Lily's words grew colder, sharper. She complained that her mother was tracking every move, that she couldn't breathe without permission. Ava responded with the usual teenage empathy, frustration, annoyance, but nothing alarming. Then, one night, at 11:42 p.m., Lily sent a message that made Ruiz stop scrolling. "You ever think about what would happen if your mom just wasn't around anymore?" Ava replied with a confused laugh emoji and wrote, "Girl, you're dark." Lily's response came seconds later. "No, I'm serious. I've thought about it." The next few messages felt like a spiral, subtle at first, then unmistakable. Lily began describing plans, small hypotheticals disguised as jokes. "If I ever did it," she wrote, "it would look like a break-in, fast, clean, no one would ever know." Ava's replies grew distant, nervous. At one point, she even texted, "Stop saying stuff like that. It's not funny." But Lily kept going. "It's not a joke," she wrote. "It's freedom." Reading those words, Hale felt a chill crawl up his spine. There was no rage in them, only conviction. This wasn't teenage dramatics. It was premeditation cloaked in casual language. The final recovered message, time-stamped 2 nights before the shooting, stopped both men cold. "She took my phone again," Lily had written. "She deserves it for taking my life." Ava never responded. Hale sat in silence, staring at that line as if it might change if he read it enough times. He imagined Ava's face when she saw the news days later, realizing what those words had truly meant. For Hale, it was the moment the case stopped being a puzzle and became a tragedy written in plain text, one that could have been stopped if only someone had known what to look for. The next morning, the sky hung low and gray over the precinct as Detective Marcus Hale prepared to meet Ava Rowe. She'd agreed to come in voluntarily, escorted by her mother. A quiet woman whose eyes carried the same kind of shock Hale had seen too many times before. Ava sat across from him in the interview room, hands trembling, a water bottle untouched in front of her. She looked smaller than she had in her school photo, fragile, haunted. When Hale played the recovered messages on the screen, her face went pale. "I didn't think she meant it," she whispered. "She always talked like that, dramatic, sarcastic. I thought it was just talk." Hale leaned forward gently. "Did you ever think she could actually hurt her mother?" Ava shook her head quickly, tears brimming in her eyes. "No, never. She loved her. She said things when she was angry, but she loved her." Her voice cracked, and for a moment the detective saw the tragedy beyond the crime. 2 children trapped in an emotional storm neither understood. Ava told them that Lily had changed over the summer. She'd grown quieter, colder. She started skipping their weekend hangouts, claiming she was busy or grounded again. When they did talk, it was about control. How unfair it was that her mother checked her phone. How suffocating it felt to be watched. Ava admitted that she'd brushed it off as teenage rebellion. "We all say things we don't mean," she said softly, "but she meant everything. I just didn't see it." Ruiz and Hale exchanged a glance. It wasn't hard to imagine. One friend consumed by digital defiance, the other too innocent to notice how far it had gone. Before Ava left, she handed Hale a small note from Lily, one she'd forgotten about until that morning. It was written weeks before the murder, folded into a paper crane. The message inside read, "When you hear what I've done, don't hate me. Just know I wasn't lying when I said I felt trapped." Hale folded the note carefully, the words echoing in his mind long after she was gone. Later that afternoon, Hale entered the interrogation room where Lily sat waiting, handcuffed, her expression unreadable. The air felt colder around her, as if the temperature itself lowered when she entered a room. He placed a printed copy of the text messages on the table and said nothing for several seconds. She glanced down, her eyes scanning the pages, and then looked up at him with unsettling calm. "You found them," she said quietly. "I knew you would." Hale studied her face, searching for remorse, guilt, anything human. But there was nothing. "Why?" he asked finally. "Why say those things to your friend? Why write that she deserved it?" Lily leaned back in her chair, her voice steady, almost thoughtful. "Because she did," she said. "She took everything that was mine. My privacy, my freedom, my voice. You call it control. I call it theft." The room went silent. Hale exhaled slowly, fighting the instinct to argue. "She was your mother," he said. Lily tilted her head slightly. "And you think that word means something?" When Hale left the room, he couldn't shake the sound of her voice, the calm certainty of it. It wasn't the voice of a child lashing out. It was the voice of someone who had already made peace with what she'd done. Dr. Vasquez later described it as cognitive dissociation, the brain's way of separating guilt from survival. But Hale wasn't convinced it was that clinical. He thought of it instead as a chilling kind of clarity, the kind that comes when someone believes their own lie so deeply, it becomes truth. As he stood in the observation booth, watching Lily sit motionless in her chair, the words from her last message looped in his mind. "She deserves it for taking my life." It was no longer a threat or even a confession. It was a manifesto, written in the language of a generation that believed the only way to be free was to destroy what held them still. The interrogation room had its own kind of gravity, a weight that pressed down on everyone who entered. The walls were bare, the air too still, the clock ticking with mechanical precision. When Detective Marcus Hale walked in, Lily Morgan was already seated at the table, her posture straight, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She didn't look afraid. If anything, she looked prepared, like she'd been waiting for this moment. The fluorescent light above cast a faint halo on her pale hair, making her seem almost ethereal, a contradiction to the file that now defined her. For a brief moment, Hale hesitated before sitting across from her. This wasn't a suspect in his eyes. This was a child who had done something unspeakable. And yet, when she finally looked at him, he saw none of the confusion or panic he'd expected. Her gaze was steady, detached. "You wanted to talk," she said simply. "So talk." Hale started carefully, avoiding accusation. "Lily," he said, "I've seen a lot of people in this room, people who made terrible choices, people who did things they can't take back. But you're not like them. You're 14. You can still explain this. You can help me understand." For the first time, a faint smirk crossed her face. "You want to understand me?" she asked. "You won't." She leaned forward, resting her chin on her folded hands. "You think this is about hate. It's not. It's about control. She wanted to own me. Every decision, every breath, even my thoughts. I told her she couldn't keep doing that, but she didn't listen. So I made her listen." Her tone was calm, deliberate, each word pronounced with eerie precision. Hale tried to keep his voice steady. "You're saying you killed her because she took your phone?" Lily's eyes narrowed slightly. "No," she said. "I killed her because she took me." The silence that followed stretched long enough for the hum of the air conditioner to fill the space. Hale's throat tightened. He'd interviewed killers who justified their actions, but never one who did it with such articulate clarity and such absence of remorse. "Did you ever think about stopping?" he asked finally. Lily tilted her head, considering. "I did stop," she said softly. "Right after I pulled the trigger." Her words hit the air like ice. There was no tremor, no guilt. "I thought there'd be noise," she continued, almost reflective. But there wasn't. Just quiet. Peaceful almost. Like everything I'd been fighting finally stopped fighting back. Hale couldn't tell if she was confessing or philosophizing. He rubbed his temple, trying to process the contradiction. A child speaking with the emotional logic of a veteran criminal. "Do you regret it?" he asked quietly. Lily paused, then smiled faintly. "No," she said, "because now I'm free. And for the first time, I don't have to explain who I am." When the interview ended, Hale stepped out into the observation booth where Dr. Vasquez was waiting. The psychologist's face was pale, her expression unreadable. "What do you think?" he asked. Vasquez sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. "She's not insane," she said. "She's self-aware, too aware. She understands morality, she just doesn't feel it." Hale leaned against the glass, watching Lily through the window. She was sitting perfectly still, tracing the outline of her handcuff chain with one finger, almost fascinated by the sound of it. "So what does that make her?" he asked quietly. Vasquez's answer came after a long pause. "It makes her dangerous. Not because she's violent, but because she believes she's right." Hale nodded slowly, his chest heavy. Outside, thunder rolled again over the city, the same storm that seemed to follow this case wherever it went. For the first time since it began, Hale realized something chilling. They weren't just trying to understand what Lily had done. They were trying to understand what she had become. The second session began hours later, after the storm outside had faded into a soft drizzle. The air in the interrogation room felt heavier this time, almost electric, as though the truth itself was waiting to be spoken aloud. Lily sat in the same chair, calm, her wrists cuffed but her composure intact. Detective Hale placed a small recorder on the table, pressed the red button, and said quietly, "Let's start from the beginning." For a long time, Lily said nothing. She stared at her reflection in the mirrored glass, as if studying herself. Then, in a tone that was almost gentle, she began. "It wasn't one moment," she said. "It happened slowly, like rust. Every rule, every lecture, every time she said, 'It's for your own good.' It built up until I couldn't breathe anymore." Her eyes flickered upward, meeting his. "You ever feel trapped, Detective? Like someone's holding your life in their hands and smiling while they do it?" Hale didn't answer. She didn't wait for one. "I started thinking about how quiet it would be without her voice, how clean the air would feel." As she spoke, there was no tremor in her tone, no hesitation, no self-pity. "The night before," Lily continued, "she took my phone again. Said she found messages she didn't like, said I needed to earn it back. I remember laughing, because it sounded so ridiculous. Earning your own freedom." She looked down at her hands, her fingers tightening slightly. "I waited until she fell asleep. Then I got up, went to her study and found the gun. She didn't even know I knew where it was." Hale's stomach turned as he listened. "I thought about waiting until morning," she said, "but I didn't want to wake up to another day of pretending. So I stood in the kitchen and waited for her. When she came in, she smiled and said, 'Good morning, baby.'" Her voice softened for the first time, almost breaking. "And then I said, 'You can stop now.'" She closed her eyes, inhaling slowly. Then it was over. Hale sat frozen, his mind struggling to keep up with the dissonance between her words and her calm. "You planned everything," he said quietly. "The cameras, the fake robbery, the messages. Why go through all that?" Lily opened her eyes again and looked at him like she was explaining something obvious. "Because people need a story," she said. "If I just told the truth, no one would believe me. They'd say I was sick. They'd say I didn't understand. So I gave them a version they could understand, a lie dressed up as a tragedy. Isn't that what everyone does?" Her logic was chilling in its precision. She wasn't boasting, and she wasn't remorseful. She was rationalizing, turning murder into metaphor. Hale felt an ache behind his ribs, the kind that comes from seeing too much too soon. "And when it was done?" he asked softly. "What did you feel?" Lily smiled faintly. "Relief," she said. "For the first time, I didn't owe anyone an explanation. I just was." When the session ended, Hale walked out of the room feeling hollow. In all his years, he'd heard countless confessions. Some shouted through tears, others muttered through guilt. But never one like this. Lily's confession wasn't an act of remorse. It was an essay on liberation. She'd turned something monstrous into something almost poetic, and that was what terrified him most. Dr. Vasquez met him in the hallway, her face pale. "She's detached from the act," she said. "It's not evil in her mind, it's logic. She's constructed a moral universe where this makes sense." Hale nodded slowly, watching through the glass as Lily sat alone, the reflection of the overhead light glowing faintly against her pale skin. "The confession of a child," he murmured. "But she's not a child anymore, is she?" Vasquez said nothing. Neither did Hale. The silence felt endless, the kind that leaves you wondering if understanding the truth is worth the cost of hearing it. By the time Lily Morgan's trial began, her name had already become a national headline. "The girl who killed for freedom," one paper called her. Another dubbed her the digital daughter. The story spread faster than truth itself, through cable news debates, social media think pieces, and late-night talk shows. Everyone had an opinion, and almost no one had the facts. What made it worse was how easily the narrative shifted depending on who told it. To some, Lily was a cold-blooded murderer who deserved to spend the rest of her life in prison. To others, she was a child victim of digital age parenting gone wrong, a symbol of a generation raised under surveillance. But in that packed Miami courtroom, where camera lenses glimmered like restless eyes, Lily was just a small girl in an oversized orange jumpsuit, her wrists cuffed, her expression unreadable. And sitting across from her, Detective Marcus Hale felt the full weight of what the world was about to witness. The prosecution opened with precision. Assistant State Attorney Marla Kent stood before the jury, her voice firm but measured. This was not an accident. This was not a moment of madness. This was methodical murder, planned by a 14-year-old who knew exactly what she was doing. She displayed the evidence piece by piece, the digital search history, the hidden video recordings, the recovered text messages. Each one painted Lily not as a confused child, but as a calculating mind rehearsing her liberation. The jurors watched in silence, their faces tightening as they saw the footage of Rebecca Morgan's final moments. Some turned away. Others couldn't look away. Marla's closing for that day was simple, devastating. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "freedom is not an excuse for murder, and brilliance is not a shield from consequence." When it was the defense's turn, the tone of the room changed entirely. Public Defender Joel Cartwright was calm, almost fatherly, as he spoke. "We are not here to decide whether a crime occurred," he began softly. "We are here to decide whether a child understood what that crime meant." He walked slowly toward Lily, who sat silently, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. This girl was raised in a world where control and technology blurred into one, where her every thought, every breath, every move was monitored, not just by her mother, but by society itself. He paused, letting the silence sink in. She didn't kill out of hatred. She killed out of confusion, born from fear, pressure, and the illusion that her only escape was destruction. The jurors shifted uneasily. Some saw manipulation, others saw tragedy. In that room, truth had become subjective, an emotional Rorschach test projected across the courtroom walls. Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered on both sides. Some held signs reading "Justice for Rebecca," others, "Save Lily." The noise was deafening. Chants, Camera flashes, reporters shouting questions that no one could answer. Hale watched from the courthouse steps as the chaos unfolded, the air thick with judgment and spectacle. He couldn't help but wonder if anyone truly cared about justice anymore, or if they just wanted a story to believe in. He thought of Rebecca, her laugh, her patience, her desperate love, and then of Lily, sitting in that courtroom with the same blank calm she'd worn since day one. Between them stretched a silence the world could never fill. For Hale, that silence had become the real tragedy, the echo of everything that went unsaid before the first shot was ever fired. The courtroom was silent when the defense announced that Lily Morgan would take the stand. The decision was unexpected, even risky. Most attorneys would have kept a 14-year-old defendant far from the witness box, but Joel Cartwright believed the jury needed to see her not as a headline, but as a human being. As Lily walked to the stand, shackled, the courtroom cameras clicked like insects in the quiet. She looked smaller than she had during the interrogation, her orange jumpsuit hanging loosely on her frame. When she raised her right hand to be sworn in, the tremor in her voice was almost imperceptible, but her eyes, calm, unblinking, never wavered. The first question came softly. "Lily, do you understand why you're here today?" She nodded. "Because I made a choice," she said. The attorney paused. "What kind of choice?" She looked out at the jury, her tone eerily measured. "One I thought would make everything stop hurting." Cartwright's strategy was clear: to show the jury that Lily was still a child, trapped in emotions too complex for her age to understand. He guided her gently, asking about her relationship with her mother, her friends, her fears. Her answers were composed, sometimes even tender. "She wasn't a bad mom," Lily said quietly. "She just didn't know how to stop fixing things that weren't broken. She thought love meant control." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. "Did you ever try to tell her that?" Cartwright asked. Lily smiled faintly. "I tried," she said, "but she listened like I was still 10. The line struck everyone: the jurors, the gallery, even Hale, who sat in the back of the room watching through the haze of fluorescent light. It wasn't arrogance in her tone. It was sadness, a sadness so deep it almost sounded like truth. When the prosecution took over, the air in the courtroom tightened like a wire. Marla Kent approached the stand, her expression sharp, her tone surgical. "Lily," she began, "you've said you understand why you're here. Do you understand that you killed your mother?" Lily didn't flinch. "Yes." "Do you understand that she loved you?" "Yes." "Then why did you do it?" Lily hesitated for the first time, her eyes drifting toward the ceiling. "Because love shouldn't feel like a cage." Kent stepped closer. "Love isn't a cage, Lily. It's protection. Parents protect their children." Lily turned her head slightly, meeting her gaze. "Then why did it feel like prison bars?" The room went utterly silent. Marla froze, her next question catching in her throat. Hale watched from the back, feeling a weight settle deep in his chest. It wasn't defiance that made Lily's words sting. It was conviction. She believed them. By the end of the day, reporters were already calling it one of the most chilling testimonies in juvenile crime history. Commentators debated whether Lily was brilliant or broken, manipulative or misunderstood. But for Detective Hale, who had spent months piecing together her story, there was no satisfaction in any of it. As he watched her being led back to her holding cell, he saw neither a monster nor a martyr, just a lost child who had mistaken control for peace. Outside, the sky over Miami was streaked with red and gold as the sun set behind the courthouse. The crowd was still chanting, divided, each side shouting over the other, trying to claim ownership of a tragedy that belonged to no one but the two women at its center, a mother who loved too much and a daughter who couldn't bear it. In the weeks that followed Lily Morgan's testimony, Miami became the epicenter of a national debate. Talk shows filled their panels with psychologists, criminologists, and moral commentators dissecting every syllable of her words. Was Lily a sociopath in the making, or a mirror of the pressures haunting an overconnected generation? Headlines screamed from every direction. The digital killer, born bad or broken. Can a child be evil? But inside the quiet halls of the Miami-Dade Juvenile Detention Center, the truth was far less theatrical. Dr. Evelyn Vasquez, the court-appointed forensic psychologist, met with Lily every day, not to interrogate, but to understand. "You can't fix what you don't first see," Vasquez had said to Hale. "And right now, all the world sees is a monster." Hale nodded, though deep down he feared that even the best explanations couldn't change what had already been done. Dr. Vasquez's sessions with Lily were methodical but human, slow, deliberate attempts to peel back layers that even Lily herself didn't fully understand. The first breakthrough came not through questions, but through silence. Vasquez had asked Lily what she thought about when she couldn't sleep. For the first time in their meetings, the girl hesitated. "I think about sound," she said softly. "The sound of my mother's voice. Before it changed. Before it started sounding like a warning." She paused, her eyes unfocused. "I think about quiet, too. I like the quiet after." Vasquez didn't respond right away. Instead, she wrote a single word in her notebook: detachment. Later, she would tell Hale that Lily's behavior wasn't driven by hatred, but by disassociation. "She didn't stop feeling love," Vasquez explained. "She just stopped recognizing it. The constant surveillance, the digital echo chambers, they fractured her sense of self. When she killed her mother, she wasn't eliminating a person. She was eliminating an authority." Meanwhile, the prosecution team had enlisted their own experts to paint a different picture, that Lily's behavior fit the early markers of antisocial personality disorder. They cited her meticulous planning, her lack of remorse, her cold intelligence. "This is not a case of a child acting impulsively," one expert testified. "This is the beginning of something much darker, a calculated pattern of dominance." The courtroom became a psychological battleground, each side weaponizing science in service of morality. Hale watched from the gallery, his jaw set. He'd read every report, every transcript. Yet the more he learned, the less certain he felt. Was Lily born broken, or did the world break her piece by piece? Was she the symptom or the consequence? The questions gnawed at him like a wound that refused to close. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy continued. Teenagers on social media began quoting Lily's lines. "Love shouldn't feel like a cage. Freedom has a cost," turning her words into digital graffiti. Influencers debated her sanity. Parents whispered her name like a warning. Hale couldn't shake the irony. Even in confinement, Lily had found a way to be heard. Her obsession with control had extended beyond death, beyond truth, into the cultural bloodstream. She had become what she always wanted to be: unforgettable. And as Hale drove home that night through the flickering neon haze of Miami's streets, he couldn't escape one thought. Maybe the most dangerous kind of obsession wasn't the one that ends in violence, but the one that survives it. Dr. Evelyn Vasquez believed that trauma never begins in the moment people think it does. It starts quietly, years earlier, like a hairline fracture that goes unnoticed until it finally breaks. As she continued her sessions with Lily, she began looking not just for what the girl had done, but for what had been done to her. It was during one of these long silences, deep into their 8th meeting, that Lily mentioned a night she'd never spoken about before. She was 9 years old, she said, and her mother had come home late from the hospital. Exhausted, distracted, but still carrying her laptop and phone. "She was always working," Lily murmured. Even when she said she was listening, she wasn't. That night, Rebecca had discovered Lily's first secret, a fake social media account where she'd been pretending to be 16. She hadn't yelled, hadn't even cried. She'd simply taken the tablet, locked it in her study, and told Lily she'd lost her privilege. It was supposed to be discipline, but in Lily's young mind, it was betrayal. "I remember thinking," she said softly. "She took me away from myself." As Dr. Vasquez listened, the pieces began to fit together. What Lily had experienced wasn't traditional abuse or neglect. It was hyper-control, wrapped in love. Rebecca Morgan had lived her life saving children, protecting them, diagnosing them. When her own daughter began drifting into the digital void, she treated it like an illness to be cured. She'd monitored her accounts, read her messages, tried to steer her back to safety. But in doing so, she'd blurred the line between care and confinement. "Children need space to develop autonomy," Vasquez later explained to Hale. But in the digital age, parents equate safety with surveillance. Lily never got to feel separate from her mother, so she destroyed the only person standing between her and the illusion of freedom. Hale listened quietly, his hands clasped, staring at the photo of Lily from years earlier. Braces, freckles, a hint of innocence that had long since vanished. "So this wasn't about hate," he said. "It was about identity." Vasquez nodded. "Exactly. She killed to define herself. It's horrific, but in her mind it was creation, not destruction." The following week, Vasquez presented her psychological report to the court. It was the most anticipated testimony of the trial, and the courtroom buzzed with a nervous energy. Her voice was calm, clinical, but beneath her words was an ache that only Hale could hear. "This case," she began, "is not about evil. It's about detachment. The psychological fallout of a generation that lives simultaneously seen and unseen." She explained how constant observation erodes empathy, how digital validation replaces emotional connection, how the mind adapts by numbing itself to guilt. "Lily Morgan is not a monster," she concluded. "She is a reflection of technology, of parenting, of a culture that confuses attention with love." The courtroom was silent. The jurors looked shaken, unsure whether to pity or fear the girl sitting beside her attorney. Hale saw something shift in their faces, understanding maybe, or something close to it. That night, Hale stood outside the courthouse steps as reporters swarmed the exits, shouting for quotes. The humid air smelled of asphalt and rain. He didn't speak to anyone. Instead, he looked up at the building. The flickering lights, the sound of cameras snapping, the world feeding on tragedy like moths to a flame. He thought about Vasquez's words. "She is a reflection." Maybe that was why the story resonated so deeply, because everyone saw a fragment of themselves in it. The parents saw fear, the children saw rebellion, the psychologists saw warning. And Hale? He saw exhaustion. The quiet, endless fatigue of trying to understand what humanity was becoming in a world that was always watching. He turned away, lighting a cigarette against the wind, the smoke curling into the humid night. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled again, soft but steady. And for the first time, he realized this wasn't just the story of a crime. It was the story of how control, digital, emotional, parental, could twist love until it became something unrecognizable. The courthouse was overflowing on the morning the verdict was to be delivered. Crowds pressed against the metal barricades, their voices rising and falling like the tide, some shouting for justice, others for mercy. Reporters had camped outside overnight, cameras poised, microphones ready to catch the moment history was made. Inside, the tension was unbearable. The air in the courtroom felt heavy, the kind of stillness that made every whisper sound too loud. Lily Morgan sat at the defense table, dressed in a plain white blouse, her hair tied neatly behind her head. She didn't look at the jury. She didn't look at anyone. Her eyes were fixed on a single point in front of her, unmoving. Detective Marcus Hale sat several rows back, his hands folded, his face unreadable. After everything he'd seen, the evidence, the interviews, the endless noise of public opinion, this was the moment that still felt impossible. How do you judge a child who committed an adult's crime? When the judge entered, the room rose. Then came the ritual, the silence, the shuffle of papers, the trembling voice of the clerk as the verdict form was handed to the foreperson. The pause that followed felt eternal. In the case of the state of Florida versus Lily Morgan, the foreperson began, her voice steady but soft. On the charge of first-degree murder, we, the jury, find the defendant? A heartbeat passed. Guilty. The word echoed through the room like a gunshot. Gasps filled the air. Some people wept, others clapped quietly, while reporters bolted for the doors to call their editors. Lily didn't move. She didn't blink. She just sat there, her expression unchanging, as if the verdict had been decided in her mind long before it was ever read aloud. Her attorney, Joel Cartwright, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, whispering something only she could hear. She didn't respond. Judge Harper thanked the jury, then asked the attorneys to approach for sentencing recommendations. The prosecution requested the maximum penalty allowable under Florida law for a juvenile convicted of murder: life in prison with eligibility for parole after 25 years. The defense pleaded for leniency, citing Lily's age, psychological state, and lack of prior record. Cartwright's voice trembled as he spoke. Your Honor, this child is not beyond redemption. She is not evil. She is lost. But even as he spoke, Hale could see that the decision had already settled in the judge's eyes. A quiet resignation that justice, no matter how carefully worded, would still break someone. When the gavel finally came down, the sentence echoed like thunder: 135 years in state custody without possibility of early release. The courtroom erupted, shouts, cries, applause, outrage, a symphony of disbelief. Through it all, Lily remained still, not a tear, not a tremor. As bailiffs led her from the room, her head turned briefly toward the gallery, her gaze catching Hale's for the briefest moment. There was no hatred there, no sorrow, just an expression he couldn't quite name, something between defiance and peace. The kind of look that said, I told you I was free. Hale sat back, the noise around him fading into silence. He had seen justice delivered before, but this time it didn't feel like victory. It felt like the closing of a circle, one that began long before a gun was ever picked up. Outside, as the crowd cheered or wept, the Florida sun broke through the clouds, harsh and bright. And Hale couldn't help thinking that somewhere beneath all the chaos, 2 lives had ended that night, one by a bullet and one by consequence. The days after the verdict were unlike anything Miami had seen in decades. The courthouse steps became a stage for chaos. Protest signs clashing against camera flashes, voices echoing off concrete walls. Half the crowd called for justice for Rebecca Morgan. The other half cried out that Lily was a child destroyed by circumstance. The media feasted on every angle. Talk shows debated whether the sentence was fair or barbaric. One headline read, "Child or Criminal, America's Moral Mirror." Another asked, who failed Lily Morgan, her mother, the system, or all of us? Social feeds burned with outrage and sympathy in equal measure, every comment thread turning into a courtroom of its own. Hale watched the storm unfold from his living room, the television casting a cold glow across the walls. Each headline twisted the story a little more, until it wasn't about Lily anymore. It was about what people needed her to represent. He turned off the TV when a reporter said, "This is the trial that will define how America sees its children." He muttered to himself, "No. It's the trial that shows how we refuse to see them at all." Dr. Vasquez tried to stay out of the spotlight, but even she became a target. Critics accused her of humanizing a killer. Supporters praised her for reminding the world that empathy isn't endorsement. She appeared on a late-night interview once, her voice steady, her words careful. "This case isn't about forgiveness," she said. "It's about understanding. And if we can't understand why a 14-year-old would rather destroy her world than live in it, then maybe the problem isn't her." The host didn't know how to respond. The audience didn't clap. They just sat there, uneasy, the truth too sharp to applaud. Hale watched that segment on his phone late at night and found himself agreeing with her. Maybe Rebecca had loved too hard. Maybe Lily had fought too hard to escape it. Somewhere between love and control, something vital had been lost. Something that no court could ever restore. A month later, Hale visited the state correctional facility where Lily had been transferred. It wasn't part of his job anymore, but something in him needed closure, though he wasn't sure what kind. The guards led him down a sterile corridor lined with buzzing lights until they reached a small visitation room. When Lily entered, wearing her beige inmate uniform, she looked different. Smaller somehow, but calmer. She sat across from him, her hands folded just like before. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Hale said quietly, "Do you understand what's happened?" She nodded. "They made it official," she said. "I belong here now." There was no bitterness in her tone, only acceptance. "Do you ever think about your mother?" he asked. Lily paused. "Every day," she said softly, "but not how you think. I don't see her dying. I see her standing in the kitchen telling me to put my phone down, to look at her, and sometimes I wish I had." Her voice trembled just once. It was the closest thing to remorse Hale had ever heard from her. When Hale left the facility that afternoon, the sun was setting over the fields behind the barbed wire. He stood by his car for a while, watching the light fade, the sky bruising from gold to gray. He thought about all the things the verdict hadn't answered, all the questions about love, control, freedom, and fear that no jury could deliberate. Justice had been served, at least on paper. But as he lit a cigarette and watched the smoke drift upward, he realized that justice and peace were not the same thing. "She's just a kid," he murmured to himself, almost in disbelief, "and she'll grow up here." The thought hollowed him. Somewhere behind those walls, Lily Morgan, the girl who killed her mother to feel free, would live out the rest of her life, aging in slow motion, trapped in the one kind of cage she couldn't break. And as the last of the sunlight disappeared, Hale whispered into the quiet, "The verdict didn't end it. It just locked it away." 10 years had passed, but for Detective Marcus Hale, time hadn't dulled the sound of that single gunshot. It still echoed in the quiet moments, in the hum of a late-night drive, in the click of a light switch, in the stillness that followed a long day. He'd left homicide 2 years after the Morgan case, his badge now locked away in a desk drawer. Officially, it was burnout. Unofficially, it was the weight of a story he couldn't let go. The world had moved on, but Hale couldn't. Every time he passed a teenage girl scrolling on her phone, every time he heard a mother's voice calling her child's name in a grocery store, the memory resurfaced, a flash of white tiles, a fallen phone, a daughter standing in silence. Some cases end when the file closes. This one had lived in him, quietly and endlessly, like a pulse that refused to stop. The Morgan case had long since faded from the headlines, buried beneath newer tragedies. But every few years, it resurfaced. Documentaries, podcasts, think pieces asking the same impossible questions. Can a child be evil? Was Lily Morgan a victim or a villain? Could it happen again? Hale never participated in the interviews. He'd had offers, book deals, true crime specials, even a streaming docu-series that wanted him as a consultant. He declined them all. Stories like that don't belong to one person, he'd told Dr. Vasquez during one of their rare lunches. They belong to everyone who failed to stop them. Vasquez, now grayer but still steady, had smiled sadly. You still think you failed her? Hale had taken a long sip of his coffee before answering. No, he'd said. I think we all did. Sometimes, late at night, Hale reread the notes he'd kept from the investigation. The transcripts, the interview summaries, Vasquez's psychological reports. One page always stopped him. A line from Vasquez's evaluation that read, Lily does not seek forgiveness. She seeks comprehension. He'd underlined it twice back then, not realizing it would haunt him for years. He thought about how many people he'd met since who reminded him of Lily in some small, invisible way. Teenagers who lived through screens, parents who mistook control for connection, families so afraid of losing each other that they'd already stopped listening. The world had become louder, faster, more digital. And yet, the silence between people, the kind that swallows words before they're spoken, had only grown wider. Hale sometimes wondered if the world had learned anything from Lily's story. He doubted it. One evening, as dusk fell over Miami, Hale drove to the old neighborhood, Palm Vista Drive. The Morgan house still stood there, repainted pale blue, a new family living inside. Children's bikes were scattered on the lawn, and the faint sound of laughter carried through an open window. He parked across the street, sitting in the glow of his dashboard lights. The laughter didn't sound haunted. It sounded whole. For a moment, he let himself believe that maybe some places could heal, even when the memories never did. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object, a silver butterfly charm, its edges tarnished with time. The same one he'd found near the curb that night, years ago. He turned it over in his hand, feeling the smooth metal press into his skin. Then he whispered, You wanted to be free, Lily. Maybe now you finally are. He set the charm on the dashboard, started the engine, and drove away into the fading light. The drive back from Palm Vista felt longer than it should have. The Miami skyline glowed faintly in the distance, a constellation of artificial stars against the black horizon. The rain started again, soft, almost tender, streaking across the windshield like memories he couldn't wipe away. Hale kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting beside the butterfly charm he'd left on the dashboard. For the first time in years, he felt something close to calm. Maybe because the house was alive again, filled with light and laughter instead of silence. Maybe because he finally understood what had been haunting him all this time. It wasn't the image of Rebecca's body or Lily's cold confession. It was the echo, the unspoken things that lived between them, the moments that could have saved everything if someone had just listened a little sooner, spoken a little softer, or seen a little deeper. He thought about Lily, now 24 years old, serving the 10th year of a sentence longer than she would ever live to complete. Occasionally, he read updates from the prison's rehabilitation program. She'd earned a GED, started painting, even led a support group for other juvenile inmates. The reports described her as polite, reserved, highly intelligent. Not once did they use the word remorseful. Hale didn't know what to make of that. Maybe she was healing. Maybe she wasn't. Maybe some people never truly return from where they go in their minds. But he liked to believe that somewhere inside her, beneath the layers of defiance and distance, there was still that small girl who once baked a cake with her mother and smiled like she meant it. He didn't know if that version of her was gone forever or simply waiting for the silence to end. The world had moved on to new crimes, new villains, new debates about justice and morality. But to Hale, the Morgan case was never about the verdict. It was about the quiet between people, the invisible space where love either grows or dies. It was about how a generation raised under constant observation learned to hide in plain sight. It was about the fragile line between guidance and control and how easily it could snap. He'd spent years searching for logic in the crime, but what he'd found instead was something far more human: loneliness. It had been there in Rebecca's need to hold on and in Lily's desperate need to break free. Both of them were prisoners, just in different cages. That realization, Hale thought, was what made the story truly unbearable. Not that one had died, but that both had. As Hale drove along the dark stretch of highway, the rain eased, and the moon broke through the clouds, pale, distant, and silent. He reached forward and touched the butterfly charm one last time before placing it on the passenger seat beside him. The road ahead stretched endlessly, shimmering with the reflections of streetlights. Freedom, he murmured almost to himself, isn't about escape. It's about being seen. The words lingered in the air like the last line of a prayer. In the end, the Morgan case wasn't about evil or justice or even forgiveness. It was about the echoes, the ones left behind when love turns to silence and silence becomes a story. Hale drove on into the night, the city lights fading behind him, the world still spinning, still forgetting, still repeating. And somewhere in the quiet distance, the echo of that long-ago gunshot softened, not gone, but gentler now, as if time itself was finally beginning to let go. Sometimes the hardest part of a story isn't the crime itself, it's what lingers after. The questions that never find answers, the faces that fade from headlines but not from memory, and the silence that stays long after the world has moved on. Lily Morgan's story wasn't just about tragedy. It was about what happens when love, fear, and control collide in the same home. It was about how easily connection can turn into confinement, and how a child's cry for freedom can echo as something far darker. Maybe that's why this story still haunts us, because deep down, we all see a piece of ourselves in it. The part that wants to protect, the part that wants to escape, and the part that wonders if we'd even recognize the line between the two. If this story made you think, feel, or question, take a moment to share it. Not for the algorithm, but for the conversation it starts. Because sometimes, the only way to end the silence is to talk about it. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real human stories that look beyond the headlines, subscribe to the channel and stay with us. There's always more beneath the surface. And together, we'll keep listening.